How does Israel make sure that this is the last war against Hamas? Check out this clip from Douglas Murray where that's the question that he's presented with. So let's watch this clip together and then we'll talk about it. But first, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Check this out.
One of the extraordinary things about the information age we live in is that a group can boast about its activities, can record and video its activities, and yet a large number of people will not believe it. It reminds me rather of al-Zawahiri, the former leader of Al-Qaeda, once was so annoyed by Westerners who were trying to deny that Al-Qaeda had carried out 9/11 that Tom and others will remember this, they did a release in which he says, no, we did 9/11, like stop taking the credit from us. And it's the same with Hamas. Hamas GoPros its savagery. And as we know from a poll last year, only 1 in 4 British Muslims believe there are any rapes or murders on the 7th of October. That's just from a poll of British Muslims. I don't know what the figures are. Some people will in the wider population. How can we live in an era where you can film your barbarism and atrocities and some people still don't believe it? Everything about the supporters of Hamas in the UK is a low-resolution, lower violence version of what Hamas does. Almost everything. It's a version of it. Look at the way in which protesters and students, for instance, they're basically doing a version of what Hamas does. Hamas does kill me or them for the camera. And the lower resolution violent version in the West is I'm going to make that policeman or I'm going to make that official hit me or the person beside me for the camera. Let's demonstrate the limits of violence. Let me show you that the state is violent. It's a very interesting replica. There is no two-state solution on the table anymore. Hamas destroyed it on October the 7th, 2023, because the Palestinians were given a de facto state in 2005 when not only every Jew. You've said nothing about the IDF, you've just described your own side. They say, we're worried that the IDF will commit genocide. Sorry, your side did its darndest to carry out a genocide. Everywhere this rule applies. The Iranian revolutionary government in Iran sends a thank you letter to students in the West for joining the Iranian revolutionary government in its fight against colonialism. The most powerful colonial power in the region is the Iranian revolutionary government that colonized Iran since 1979 and suppressed a great people, that has colonized Iraq, colonized Lebanon, colonized Syria, colonized Yemen, and they accuse Israel of being a colonialist state. What have young Western students been brought up to believe, in the Anglosphere primarily, in recent years? They've been told, particularly in America, they've been told that they're guilty by dint of being born in the country they were born in. They're told that they're guilty of genocide. They're guilty of ethnic cleansing. We're told in Britain and elsewhere that we're guilty of the crime of colonialism. We're guilty of slavery, of white supremacy, and racism, and some other things. And I said in my last book, The War on the West, I said this is very, very dangerous because you're setting people up into a moral system you cannot get out of. It's a system of guilt with no possibility of forgiveness, because nobody is alive who did the thing and nobody is alive who could forgive. So all you're saying is you should live your life in an unrelenting cycle of guilt. I believe very strongly that for this to be the last Gaza war and the last Lebanon war, people must understand in the region and outside that Israel is going nowhere. Not least because the Jewish people have nowhere to go, if not there. And that, by the way, sorry, it's a long answer to a short question, but that, by the way, that's one of the key things that I think people have to realize around the world is that the trauma that Israel is still in is not post-traumatic, it's trauma still. The trauma that still exists in Israel from October the 7th is the glimpse for a matter of hours, a glimpse of what annihilation would look like. There's a strain of American right-wing thought which can be traced back to the 30s and earlier, but its most prominent version in recent decades has come from the Buchananite right, which is trying to, there's two things it's trying to do intellectually. It is trying to argue that America should not have got involved in the war, in the Second World War, or indeed the First, and that it should have allowed the Nazis and the Soviets, the communists, to fight it out. It's an interesting, semi-interesting substrain of historical play, effectively. But the second thing it's trying to do, and I think is much, much darker, is it's trying to get around the National Socialism. It's trying to say the Nazis screwed it up for everyone. They made it impossible to do Christian nationalism. They spoiled it for everyone, basically. And if it hadn't been for the Nazis, it would all be going so much better. It's an interesting critique of Nazism. But what it doesn't contend with is what we used to call reality. It's a horseshoe theory of politics, isn't it? The far left and the far right end up meeting. They tend to meet because they're going, hey, you're interested in the Jews as well. Interesting, let's see if we can get on. I mean, the left-wing, far-left anti-Israelism is in part, thinks it's being anti-racist. That's one of its presumptions. The far-right hatred of Israel tends to be that they agree with the left that Israel is a racist state, but they want one too. So it's like, so all the left says, like, you're a white ethnic supremacist state, Israel, and again, hilariously off, but the far left says, you Israel, are a far right white supremacist state, and then the far right in America says, yeah, why can't we do that? And this dispute is ongoing, but the anti-Churchillism is a hilarious version of the horseshoe theory, because the reason why the radical left in recent years in America and Britain was attacking Churchill is because they realized it would demoralize us. Because if you take away the public heroes, you take away the nation, you know. And so the radical left that went for Churchill did that to demoralize. But now the right in America is playing with anti-Churchillism for essentially David Irving-esque reasons, which is that their aim is to, as far as I can understand it, their aim is to diminish the Holocaust, maximize the crimes of Churchill, say that there's moral equivalency, and then do the final move, which is to say Churchill was worse. I mean, it seems preposterous to us because it is. It's just that this is something that is going on a segment of the right, and I think it's not just a duty but a pleasure to call it out. Can you imagine if what has been done to Jews in this country or on campuses in America was done to any other minority? If one black student had been chased across campus, as Jewish students were at Columbia repeatedly, with calls to go back to Africa, as the Jewish students were told to go back to Poland, if that had happened once, you think that the administrations would say, well, it's a speech matter and da-da-da-da-da. No, they wouldn't. If there'd been marches through the center of this city by actual far-right groups calling for the destruction of the killing of all black people. You think that black Brits wouldn't have spoken up? You think that any other minority would stand silent as their annihilation is being called for, and violence against their people is called for? Who else would put up with that? And it's partly an expression of the decency of the community of this country that this has been put up with, but I just think it shouldn't be. And obviously, without treading on even more sore toes, obviously much of this has to do with the weakness of communal leadership.
I think one of the interesting points that he makes over here in response to the question of how does Israel make this the last war is that Israel needs to make it declared loud and clear to the world, especially the world around it, that it's not going anywhere. Part of the wishy-washiness and the sort of back and forth skirmish is that the other countries around Israel don't want to acknowledge Israel's right to exist. They don't think that it ever did exist. They still can't even accept the fact that it does exist. And so the idea of allowing that to be something that's on the discussion table is part of the fact of what prolongs this situation, is that they're fighting for their own right to exist. And that's why, I mean, politicians say this essentially easy and obvious thing every time there is a skirmish that happens in Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself. Well, of course it does. Like that's such a nonsense, irrelevant point. Like every country has the right to defend itself. The fact that that's even something that's uttered, I mean, I get why politicians utter that, but in theory, like, why should that even have to be something that's said? That's not a question. America was attacked. America has the right to defend itself. Brazil was attacked. Brazil has the right to defend itself. Like, it's such a silly comment in any other context except when it comes to Israel. Israel, it's like, well, I said such a good thing. Israel has the right to defend itself. Well, yeah, of course it does, because every sovereign nation has the right to defend itself after it's attacked. But the undergirding premise that is relevant to that area is that the people in that region outside of Israel have predominantly not accepted Israel's right to exist. And Israel being firm in that they not only had the right to exist, that they're not going anywhere from in the future, is already okay. Well, now that's off the table. Now we can move forward in perhaps a more constructive way. But we have to treat it as if Israel is not going anywhere either, and that is a part of the issue. And so that's interesting points that Douglas Murray brings up over here. Would love to stay in touch with all of you. If you like this content overall, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Take care.